The bone in the backyard. They said the dog wouldn't stop scratching at the far corner of the fence. They said the first thing the neighbor noticed was the smell. Sweet, metallic, wrong. They said what the animal carried through the sliding door that morning was not a toy, but a bone. According to official records, the call to 911 came at 07:42. Even seasoned officers were shaken. What followed would be recorded as one of the most unsettling cases the precinct had seen in years. A missing 16-year-old girl, a quiet street where autumn leaves still gathered in gutters months after the first frost, a house where music had throbbed late into the night, and a neighbor's dog that could not leave the earth alone. The officers who arrived did what officers always do. They measured, they photographed, they bagged and tagged. But the object itself, its contours, its unmistakable density, carried a whisper that no camera could still. Something had been buried there. Something that should have been safe, intact, alive. Her name was Amara, 16, African American. By all accounts, she loved to take pictures of the sky just before it turned black, that shade of navy that lasts only minutes and makes streetlights look like halos. She had a way of holding silence in photographs, the kind of silence that feels warm, like breath on glass. Speak, prosody rate, -2%, pitch -1%. Friends told investigators she had been going through a phase. Black nails, charcoal eyeliner, the soft collapse of hoodies that swallowed her shoulders. Her mother would later say the change began in autumn, after a concert, after a boy. His name was Alan. His name was Alan. You will hear it in the official audio logs, flat, clinical, a syllable reduced to evidence. Alan, 19. A self-anointed nobody with a somebody's hunger. Break time 380, a goth, according to the school resource officer, which on paper means nothing, but to those who watched him stalk the periphery of stages, it meant a language of shadows and stitched-up nights. Break time 380, a single Rachel with mail very shallow. He had a band, or the beginning of one, and a record of stupid things, the kind magistrates write without adjectives: trespass, disorderly conduct, a fight behind a liquor store when winter's first ice made the alley shine like glass. Nothing then, on paper, that prophesied horror. And yet, in November, under a cathedral of dying leaves, Amara met him. Witnesses recall black lights in a church basement that was not a church, and sound that rumbled through the ribs like an engine about to stall. He sang, if that's the word, into a mic wrapped with tape, words pooling in the low ceilings. He noticed Amara because she didn't flinch when feedback screamed. She noticed him because his voice felt like a door that had never been opened, and for a moment she believed there was a room behind it that belonged to her. After that night, friends say she shifted. The photos on her phone bled into grayscale. The Polaroids on her wall went crooked and stayed crooked. A new vocabulary seeped in. Void, hunger, devotion. She began to dress like a shadow that wanted to be seen. According to official records, her grades dipped in December. According to official records, guidance counselors called twice and spoke to voicemail. According to official records, Alan was known to law enforcement, but official records do not remember the smell of his basement after a rain, or the tinnitus that followed their shows, the thin electrical line in the air that tastes like the color blue. Records do not remember the way Amara whispered, "I'm fine," the way young people do when they want to be believed, and how those two words can sound like a curtain drawn across a window at noon. February 19, a Sunday. Her mother's notes, written in the stiff hand of someone trying to stay steady, capture the plainness of the morning. Oatmeal, church on TV, laundry spinning. Amara asks if she can stay at a friend's house, late, maybe overnight. The mother looks at the clock, looks at the laundry, looks at the sky pressing against the window like an old worry. "Text me when you get there," she says. "Send a photo." She does, a ceiling fan in motion, a poster with a moon. Later, investigators will conclude the image was taken elsewhere. That night, at 11:13, the mother sends a second text, a small net thrown into dark water. "Good night, love. Delivered." not red. What happened between those blue bubbles and the next morning is the terrain we will cross, carefully, soberly, in the chapters ahead. For now, there is only the neighbor, the dog, the bone, and a house that would become a map of fragments. There were others inside that house. According to statements taken days later, 3 friends who orbited Alan the way faint stars gather around something heavier. Their names, for now, will be initials, the way it is in the first days, when truth is still being spelled. There was music, always music, low, insistent, the metronome of dread. There was a door with a lock that clicked like a throat. There were candles burned to stubs, a table with symbols nicked into its surface, a book without a cover that smelled like damp. Some will say this was a ritual, that the arrangement of objects, the timing, the words scrawled in the margins meant something ancient and precise. Others will say that teenagers, when untethered, will drape chaos in the costume of meaning, will call their hunger a sacrament, their cruelty a creed. But what happened next defies any ordinary logic. An investigator will appear to say in footage aired months later, face blurred, voice altered, "We have physical evidence, yes, but motive is a ghost, even now." The case file breathes with contradictions. The music stopped at 2:03, or perhaps it never stopped and only the recording did. A neighbor heard a scream, or a laugh, or the squeal of a chair on concrete. The power flickered, or someone just turned off a lamp. Some believe the truth was buried for good that night. A reporter narrates over archival B-roll, under dirt, under panic, under panic. Under the stories, people tell themselves to sleep. At 07:42, the neighbor's voice shook, but did not break. "There's a bone," he said, "in my kitchen. My dog brought it in. I think it's human. I think it's human." Dispatch coded the call and sent a car. Then 2. Then the white van, and that makes neighbors look at their shoes. Officers moved like men at the edge of a tall building, every step measured. Every breath a question. They opened the yard. They opened the earth. They opened the earth. In the first shovel of soil, a coil of hair. In the second, something red that was not a root. The sergeant closed his eyes, just once, then spoke in the voice the academy teaches. "Secure the perimeter. Call the coroner. Start the log." Even seasoned officers were shaken. And somewhere, in the hours before the sun remembered how to climb the houses on that street, a mother's phone lit up with an alarm she had set the night before. "Good morning." The screen was bright. The room was black. The message waited for a girl who would not read it. Sunday, February 19th. According to official records, the last verified sighting of Amara that Sunday occurred at 18:27. A bus camera capturing a girl in a dark hoodie. The drawstrings tucked. Her eyes swallowed by shadow as she pressed herself against a window. She stepped off 2 stops early, not at the street that led to her friend's apartment, but at the corner where abandoned rails cut the neighborhood like an old scar. The temperature hovered just above freezing. The air smelled of wet leaves and metal. She walked with purpose, a witness would later say, though what purpose can be assigned after the fact is a kind of wishful thinking. What we know is smaller, simpler. Her footsteps, quick. The phone in her pocket, silent. The city, indifferent. She texted at 19:03. Here, a single word, an alibi sent into the blue. The photo that followed, a ceiling fan, a moon poster, would be judged misleading by examiners who froze pixels and measured angles. But what happened next defies any ordinary logic. Because at 19:03:11, a motion camera a block away recorded a figure slipping past a chain-link fence toward a house where a basement window glowed the weak yellow of a dying bulb. According to official records, the property belonged to Alan's grandmother, who had been moved to assisted living the previous year. He had the run of it, a key, a workshop, a room that had been made to look like a stage, in a room that had been made to look like a church. Inside, there were 4 of them. Alan, 19, dressed in black, as if the color could swallow all consequence. 3 others, boys who had learned to orbit him in exchange for belonging. J, who wrote symbols in a notebook and never looked anyone in the eye. R, who carried the amp and said almost nothing. And D, the youngest, with a laugh that didn't match his eyes. According to their later statements that contradicted themselves and each other, they were recording, practicing, vibing, waiting. Waiting for what? No one can tell you the truth about that night without lying a little. Even the audio recorders hum with uncertainty. The basement smelled like damp concrete and old tobacco. A bed sheet had been tacked to a wall and painted with a circle of thorns. Candles flickered in glass jars, supermarket tomatoes repurposed as reliquaries. On a folding table lay a chipped metronome, a coil of speaker cable, 2 knives with tape around the handles, and a book with its cover torn away. Detectives would later call the book a miscellany, pages torn from occult forums. Smudged photocopies, lyrics hand-copied into margins. Some believe the truth was buried for good that night. A reporter would intone months later, under theatrics, under fear, under the need to feel chosen. At 1924, a car slowed in front of the house and then kept moving. The driver would tell officers he felt a vibe, a phrase that does not belong in an affidavit, and yet there it is, black on white, a small shiver in the official spine of the story. At 1931, a neighbor heard the basement door open and close, a quick intake of cold air, the scrape of a boot, then music, low, repetitive, the same 4 notes insisting on themselves like a headache. Amara was there by then, that much we accept. How she entered, whether invited by text, beckoned by a shadow at the door, pulled by the gravity of an idea, remains a space where certainty thins. But she was there. Even seasoned officers were shaken. The sergeant would say later, recalling the first sweep of that basement. On a shelf, a row of glass jars, with melted wax crusted like barnacles. On a wall, a calendar frozen on November. The date of the show where they met circled twice. Taped to the furnace, a set list. Void, offering, rain. Offering, a word that would turn the autopsy summary into a field of landmines for the coroner's pen. And yet, careful. This is not the place for gore. We are not here to ladle shock into the throat. We are here to name what can be named, and to note the places where the light refuses to land. According to official records, phones in that room connected to a router labeled Guest 2G. Data reveals searches at 1942 and 1949. Old rights meaning. Blood as symbol music. Then silence. At 20:06. A video file began to record and then stopped at 20:07. The clip was corrupted. A jitter of pixels, a smear of motion, a candle flaring like a sun. Some will say this is proof of sabotage, others of electricity failing in old houses. Conspiracy stirs easiest where the floorboards already creak. Here's what witnesses outside remember. A draft under the door, like the house exhaled, the faintest scent of something metallic, then wax, then nothing at all. Laughter once, too loud, too sharp, and then a hush that felt practiced. They were acting, the neighbor on the north side decided, like boys pretending to be men. But pretending has a way of tipping. Theater curdles into doctrine. Chanting hardens into orders. And a mask worn long enough begins to shape the face beneath it. Amara had adopted their style, black ribbons on her wrists, a silver ring that looked like a thorn, eyes lined until they mapped their own night. She wanted to belong. Her friend M told police, the words scraping her throat. Belonging is the most dangerous word in the youth lexicon. After love, before forever. In the basement, belonging had rules. Stand in the circle, hold the candle. Repeat the lines, make a promise. Zgidna z oficjalnymi zapisami. Forgive the slip of another language. According to official records, the words were lifted from online fragments and stitched together without sense. But sense is not the point. Point is the sensation of meaning, a borrowed solemnity, the way candlelight makes every face look older. But what happened next does not answer to logic. At 20:19, the music cut. The metronome kept clicking. a wooden heart that did not know it had been abandoned. In the upstairs kitchen, the faucet dripped into an aluminum sink, small sounds that police later preserved with the reverence of hymns. In the yard, frost began to form on the top rung of the chain-link fence. At 20:23, a car door slammed 2 houses down, and someone cursed about the cold. At 20:26, no one remembers anything at all, or so they will swear. There are gaps here, deliberate, accidental, or merciful. A spiral notebook with 2 pages torn out. A text drafted and never sent. I can't. Followed by a blank space where a word might have saved her, or not. A smudge on the coverless book where a thumb pressed too hard. A stain on the cement that, in the right light, was just water. Some say the basement was a stage and nothing more. The late-night radio host would sigh months later. Others say something older sat in that room. Not a demon, not a god, but the human appetite wearing a borrowed skull. By 21:03, the house had quieted. The candles, 3 of them, guttered, their glass soot streaked. A single window held a rectangle of the streetlight like a thin, unnatural moon. Down the block, a bus chuffed, took on no one, and pulled away. Inside, a phone vibrated against concrete, unheard, or ignored, or silenced by a palm pressed down too long. The night deepened, not dramatically, not like in movies where thunder auditioned for the lead, but with the slow, indifferent patience of winter. And somewhere, in the next room, 4 young men rehearsed their alibis without knowing it, the way one practices a song, again and again, until the wrong notes almost sound right. The circle and the silence. According to official records, a last successful ping from Amara's phone hit a tower at 21:14, a narrow cone that includes Alan's grandmother's address, 3 cul-de-sacs, and the strip of scrub behind the chain-link fence where trains no longer run. After that, the device fell quiet, as if someone had cupped a hand over a mouth. Investigators would later note that the Wi-Fi, guessed 2G, briefly dropped at 21:17 and came back at 21:20, a flicker that could be explained by age, by weather, by everything and nothing. But what happened next defies ordinary logic. The lieutenant wrote in his summary, the ink pressed deep enough to score the paper. Inside the basement, the circle had been chalked thicker, the ring of thorns painted on the sheet, now shadowing a second ring on the floor. The metronome clicked on, then off, then on again, a wooden pulse that seemed to count breaths none of them were taking. Alan paced, not dramatically, but with a fretful energy that made the candles tremble. Jay murmured lines he had copied into his notebook, fragments from obscure forums and scanned pamphlets that meant less than the hush they created. R, dependable as a piece of furniture, checked the amp and coiled cables into neat shapes. D laughed, too loud, then apologized to no one in particular, the apology floating like dust. Some believe the truth was buried forever that night. The reporter would say over B-roll, beneath pretense, beneath fear, beneath a hunger for meaning that turned meaning into a mask. Amara stood at the edge of the circle, black ribbons at her wrists, the silver ring like a thorn. In photos recovered later, not from that night, but from weeks before, she wears that ring with a softness that hurts to see. She had wanted to belong, a word her friend M would repeat to officers like a confession. Belong, belong, belong. Belonging asks for small things at first, a playlist, a dress code, a late hour. Then sometimes it widens its hands. According to official records, the DA's memo dryly notes, the language used in the group that evening suggested pledge, trial, and passing through. The terms were inconsistent and assembled from disparate sources. In other words, theater dressed as doctrine. A sound upstairs, the refrigerator motor thudding to life, made all 4 boys look up at once. Like a cue, D would later tell an interviewer, the only time his voice rose. Then, another cue, a timer on someone's phone that chimed and was swatted into silence. They had made a schedule. They had written times next to songs on a set list that had never seen an audience. Void 20, 0 to 20, 20. Offering 20, 20 to 21. Rain, if needed. Even seasoned officers were shaken by the tidy handwriting. What happened in those minutes cannot be rendered in detail here. Not because the facts are absent, but because the human need to look away is not a weakness. It is a kind of respect. There were words spoken in low voices, not ancient, not powerful, but heavy with the weight adolescents give to things they do not fully understand. There was motion, a shuffle, a stumble, a sudden stillness that spun the candle flames into narrow spears of light. A staged ordeal that became an irreversible act, one investigator wrote. Plain, unsentimental. The way one writes when adjectives feel like lies. No demons, no spells, no thunderclap. Just people in a room, and a choice that emptied the room of air. At 21:28, the neighbor on the north side heard a door, not the basement, but the small back door that sticks in winter, open and close. The temperature had dropped just below freezing. Frost stiffened the top rails of the fence. He stepped onto his porch, saw nothing, and went back in. I didn't want to be the neighborhood busybody, he told police. At 21:33, the porch camera across the street captured the faintest smear of movement, a figure dragging something that might have been a bag, might have been a tarp, might have been only the camera lying to itself. The clip would be slowed, stabilized, analyzed until the pixels surrendered nothing at all. According to official records, a shovel was found later, mud clotted on the blade, the handle wrapped in tape. The soil behind the garage had been recently disturbed. Nearby, on a plastic lawn chair, the coverless book lay open to a page of lyrics that were not lyrics, a collage of phrases that pretended to be a right. They built a story to stand inside. The coroner would say during a training lecture months later, and then the story built them. It is a cold sentence, but it fits the room. We return to the small things because the large ones cannot be held. A candle cracking its own glass with a tiny pop. A drip in the kitchen sink that learned the shape of the aluminum below. The metronome finally stilled with a thumb that pressed a fraction too long. In the corner, a thrift store clock ticked forward, 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 remorseless as weather. D said, "We should go," and nobody answered. R said, "It's done," and nobody asked what it meant. J wrote a single line and then tore the page out, a page never found. Phones lit and went dark. A draft moved under the basement door, like the house exhaled. The south side neighbor would remember. Somewhere, the word police was spoken in a whisper, then canceled by another word. Wait. Panic has a grammar. Short sentences, dropped subjects, verbs that don't quite agree. We were scared, D would later say, a truth that does not make anything smaller. At 21:47, an app on Alan's phone opened a flashlight. A narrow cone of light played along the concrete, then up the wooden stairs, then out into the yard. The yard looked back, blank, indifferent, with the patience of ground that has seen all kinds of stories end in its mouth. The chain-link fence hummed in the cold. A dog barked 3 houses over, then stopped. Some say the house swallowed the night. The radio host would sigh in his late slot. Others say the night simply kept walking. By 22:10, the candles had died. The basement smelled of wax and damp and the faint metallic tang that would later send the sergeant to the door to breathe air that hurt his lungs. Upstairs, there were mugs with rings of instant coffee, a carton of milk with a date gone soft, a postcard from the assisted living facility addressed to a grandmother who no longer recognized her own name. The ordinary waited beside the unforgivable, an arrangement human beings find again and again, to our shame. Text messages from Amara's mother stacked like small prayers, simple, unadorned. Tell me when you're settled. Did you eat? Good night, love. Delivered. Not read. In the basement, a phone vibrated. Whether in a pocket, on concrete, under cloth, no one would specify, and perhaps no one could. The vibration traveled into the floor joists, up through the heater vents, into a kitchen that had forgotten how to be warm. But what happened next? The lieutenant's summary repeats. As if repetition might make sense arrive, does not answer to reason. Midnight approached without ceremony. The streetlight drew its pale rectangle on the single window. Far away, a train wailed. Not here, not on those rusted rails, but somewhere the tracks still mattered. In the house on that quiet street, 4 boys and a silence sat together. And outside, beyond the chain link, beyond the frost, the ground waited, patient, certain, as if it already knew the neighbor's dog would not be able to leave it alone. 7 days of not knowing. According to official records, the missing person report was filed at 09:12 on Monday, February 20th. The officer on desk duty typed carefully, the way you do when a name might soon belong to headlines. Age, 16. Last seen, Sunday evening. Clothing, black hoodie, black jeans, black boots. Distinguishing features, small crescent scar at the base of the left thumb. The mother's voice was steady until it wasn't. The form does not have a field for that. What followed was the choreography that communities learn by heart and never admit they have practiced. Flyers printed, cut, and taped to glass doors that breathe each time a customer enters. School administrators sending emails with subject lines that skip the word missing and choose instead concerned. Friends calling friends who call cousins who call a boy who might have seen her on the bus. Some believe the truth was buried forever that week, a broadcaster would say later. Under routine, under rumor, under the soft lie that good girls always come home. Detectives began where detectives always begin, the phone. The house, the street between. The here, text at 19:03. The ceiling fan photo judged deceptive. The silence after 23:13 that felt like a door closing somewhere far down a long hallway. They canvassed the bus line. They asked for external cameras from a convenience store that had never fixed the timestamp on its DVR. Every clip claimed it was April of the previous year. They knocked on Alan's door on Tuesday. No one answered, which is a kind of answer. According to official records, a neighbor said the house had company Sunday night, boys with gear, and that there was a vibe. The detective did not write the word vibe, he wrote activity. At school, the counselor sat with Amara's closest friend, M, in a room whose walls had posters about breathing. She changed after the concert. She said she felt seen. The counselor wrote the word seen and underlined it once, then twice. According to official records, M provided 3 first names and 1 username. 2 of the names led to boys who shrugged in sweatshirts and said they didn't really know her. They just said hi sometimes. You know how it is. The username led to a private account with a single public post, a photo of a candle guttering in a jar, captioned rain. The search widened. An officer walked the disused trats where weeds punch through wooden sleepers like elbows. A cadaver dog worked a grid behind a chain-link fence, nose low, tail stiff, then broke and waited. A handler's hand on the collar like a prayer. Volunteers combed the scrub behind the cul-de-sacs, talking too loudly because silence felt like permission for bad thoughts. A drone whined above the neighborhood and saw only roofs and rectangles and the mathematical patience of streets. Even seasoned officers were shaken. The sergeant admitted later, not by what they found, but by what they did not. On Wednesday, they returned to Alan's grandmother's property with a warrant. The living room was a museum of ordinary time, crocheted Afghan porcelain figurines. A TV paused mid-commercial where a cartoon lemon smiled forever. In the kitchen, a postcard from the assisted living facility curled at the corners. She liked judge shows, the grandmother would say weeks later, asked to remember a room that did not remember her. Downstairs, the basement held its breath. The candles were gone. The sheet with the thorn-crowned circle was folded as if a ritual could be undone with neatness. The metronome sat silent, the coverless book gone. On a shelf, a ring of wax where glass had once been. On the floor, chalk dust walked into arcs by careless feet. According to official records, an officer's boot lifted a square of cardboard and found nothing. Nothing can be an indictment. The boys' statements, when they finally came, were mosaics of almost. Alan said they jammed, then hung out, then called it early. Jay said he left at like 9-something, then maybe 10, then before midnight. R stuck to monosyllables so faithfully that one detective scribbled, not unkindly, limited vocabulary. D cried. "We were play acting," he said. "We were pretending to be deep. Pretending has an echo. It lingers after the sound is gone." According to official records, inconsistencies were noted. According to official records, follow-up interviews were scheduled. According to official records, none of the four asked, "Is she okay?" By Thursday, rumor had learned to run. A woman at the laundromat said she'd heard about a cult. A man at the bus stop said he'd heard about a gang. A freshman convinced herself she'd seen Amara at the mall, and then, when a detective showed her Sunday's bus footage, convinced herself she had not. The radio host in the late slot squeezed the story into the shape of his brand. "Dark rights in a quiet town," he teased. Or is the darkness just a lens we use when we cannot bear the simple words, harm, choice, consequence? Between songs, he invited callers. They offered theories. Theories can be a kind of weather. They move in, they move out. They leave you colder. On Friday, a storm threatened, and then decided to go somewhere else. The sky hung low, and the air smelled like wet pennies and wires. The mother sat at her kitchen table, with the phone on a folded towel, so it would not skate. Orders for food canceled mid-app. A sweater tied around her waist because putting it on would mean she was settled, and she refused to be settled. According to official records, the lieutenant's summary would note with bureaucratic gentleness, "Family was cooperative but distraught," a line that could be left on the doorstep of any grief in any zip code. Saturday passed with the slow cruelty of days that do not choose. The search grid doubled back on itself. The cadaver dog returned, worked the same squares, paused at the chain-link fence, moved on. A deputy sifted the mulch behind the garage and found only a penny, a plastic bread tag, and a fragment of something that, thank God, was only ceramic. But what happened next does not answer to logic, the lieutenant wrote, as if the sentence could fence off fate. Because the next morning, Sunday, fate woke early. At 07:38, a neighbor on the south side slid open his patio door to let the dog out. The dog went to the far corner of the yard with a purpose of its own. Scrape, pant, scrape. The neighbor called, the way you do when you are not yet fully in the day. "Hey, leave it!" The dog did not. It returned with something gripped in its mouth. Not a toy, not a stick. The neighbor took a step forward and then stopped, the way a person does at the edge of an unseen drop. The smell arrived first, sweet, metallic. "Wrong. There's a bone?" He told the dispatcher at 07:42, voice level, because panic is easier when it has a job. "My dog brought it in. I think it's human." Dispatch sent a car, then another, then the white van that makes people look at their shoes. The officers moved with the cautious grammar of bad possibility. Tape, cones, a log started with the time and the weather, and the names of people who would remember where they stood for the rest of their lives. In the first shovel of earth, a strand that could have been root until it was not. In the second, a color the ground does not claim. The sergeant closed his eyes, just once, and said the words that turn a yard into a scene. "Secure the perimeter." Even seasoned officers were shaken. Some say the week was a test, the radio host murmured months later, not of faith, but of attention, of how long a town can hold its breath before it must face the shape of what it feared. According to official records, the shape was found. According to official records, evidence was collected. According to official records, the story we have been telling ourselves since the first missing posters went up would have to learn a new tense. Past. Excavation, evidence, and the first lies, according to official records. The scene perimeter expanded twice before noon. Yellow tape advanced like a tide. First the neighbor's yard, then the easement behind the chain link, then the narrow strip where the rails once shivered the neighborhood awake. Crime scene text moved with the choreography of bad days. Flags, photographs, measurements whispered to a recorder that would later make the room go still. A second dog worked the fence line. A third unit fetched shovels wrapped at the handles with fresh tape. The ground gave what it had been asked to hold. Even seasoned officers were shaken. What the earth returned will not be recited here in detail. It is enough to say that the coroner's van arrived. It is enough to say that the sergeant used the voice the academy teaches and that for a moment it trembled anyway. It is enough to say that a mother was taken to a quiet room and that the phrase "we regret to inform you" fell like a curtain between what had been and what would never be again. By early afternoon, an affidavit bloomed from notes. The dots connected, not elegantly, not cleanly, but with the inevitability of lines drawn over a map already creased by use. The last bus footage, the phone ping, the neighbors' accounts, music, laughter, a hush too heavy for play. The prior canvas at the grandmother's address, the usernames, the set list taped to the furnace, void, offering, rain, noted in the first search, dismissed then as teenage theater, now elevated to evidence. A judge read, frowned, signed. Warrants issued. The house, the devices, the persons. They took Alan first. The arrest happened in a parking lot behind a discount store, where a banner promised prices that cannot be beat. He didn't run. The photograph taken against the hood shows a boy who had styled himself as darkness confronted by the unromantic brightness of a winter noon. Hands behind, eyes sideways, mouth set in the thin line of someone who has mistaken control for a costume he can put on again later. Jay was found at home, a notebook on his desk. 2 pages torn neatly, the edges too straight to have been hurried. R answered the door with a coiled cable in his hand, as if sound itself might grant him an alibi. D opened, looked at the uniforms, and broke into tears so sudden the first officer flinched. According to official records, all 4 were transported without incident. According to everyone else in the hallway that day, the air tasted like a battery. The second search of the basement found what the first had missed, not because it wasn't there, but because meaning had changed shape overnight. Wax rings on shelves mapped absence. The chalk on concrete had been brushed at with a sleeve, leaving gray ghosts of arcs that no foot could deny. In a paper grocery bag, the metronome, silent. A candle stub, a cheap knife with tape around the handle. On the washer, a router labeled Guest 2G, still breathing. But what happened next does not answer to logic, the lieutenant wrote, pen biting the page. The router logs, to the extent the old machine kept them, showed devices connecting, disconnecting, connecting again. A video file fragment surfaced on a recovered laptop. 31 seconds of noise and blur, a candle blowing wide, a shadow passing like a hand over a lens. Then, crucial minutes of nothing. A glitch, said one analyst. A deliberate deletion, said another. Some believe the truth was buried forever in that gap, under panic, under purpose, under the urge to control how the story would be told. At the medical examiner's office, the language turned careful. Evidence consistent with assault replaced the brutal plural of what had been done. Ritualistic elements present was a phrase everyone hated and used anyway, because photographs permit no euphemism. A pattern of wax, knife tape fibers, symbols traced not with expertise but with fervor. No ancient spell, no antique grammar. Just a collage of borrowed gestures, printed out and recopied until meaning thinned to theater, and then theater curdled into harm. According to official records, toxicology was unremarkable. According to rumor, that meant purity, intention, choice. Rumor is a liar that sounds like a friend. The interviews began. 4 rooms. 4 cameras with clocks at the bottom that will one day box every word in a chain of custody. Alan asked for a lawyer and sat very straight as if posture were a shield. His yes-no answers came like pushpins pressed into cork. He jammed. He hung out. He never saw her leave. He had no idea about the yard. Jay tried for erudition and produced only fragments. Liminal, initiation, symbolic death, terms he had copied without understanding from forums that mistook mood for meaning. R chose minimalism. Didn't see, don't know. Wasn't there then. A litany that built a box around him and left no door. D cried. The detective slid a box of tissues across the table and did not touch it again. We were pretending, D said. We wanted to feel like we mattered. The camera kept time. The clock at the bottom kept its own. Here the story sprouts disputes, some petty, some heavy. A body-worn camera lost 6 minutes when a battery icon winked red at the worst possible moment. An evidence bag was mislabeled and then relabeled. The correction form stapled and initialed until the paper groaned. A neighbor swore she saw a fifth figure that night, taller than Alan, wearing a hat no one else remembered. A digital timestamp on the corrupted clip insisted it had been created at 3:07 a.m., which aligned with nothing but the oldest human habit, error. Even experienced officers stumble under the weight of ordinary failure. An internal review would later scold. Too late to comfort anyone. The small city did what small cities do. It built shrines at bus stops, with candles that guttered in the wind and leaked tears of wax onto concrete. It curated outrage and comfort in alternating posts. It drafted, from despair, a kind of fellowship. Meanwhile, online, strangers with careful avatars braided conjecture into conviction. A cult imported from a distant forum. A police cover-up engineered to protect a phantom relative. A pact that would blossom into an army of the night. Furies are weather. They move in. They move out. They leave you cold even when the sun returns. According to official records, a DA's office filed charges the following week. Murder, conspiracy, unlawful disposal, enhancements to be argued. Bail denied. The arraignment took 14 minutes. The courtroom smelled of old wood and disinfectant. The boys sat in the wrong kind of black, the kind issued by the county. Alan glanced once toward the gallery and found only the flat stare of fluorescent light. Some believe the basement was a stage and nothing more. The radio host murmured, gentle for once. Others believe something older took a seat in that room. Not a demon, not a god, merely the human appetite wearing a mask. Either way, the mask would go on the evidence shelf. Either way, a trial was coming. And what happened next? The lieutenant's summary warns, will not make sense either. Justice has its own weather. Rooms with clocks at the bottom. According to official records, jury selection began in late spring. The court reporter noted the small things first, the fluorescent buzz, the squeak of a juror's chair, the way the mother kept her eyes on an empty corner of the room, as if someone she loved might step out of it. The charges were read in a voice that had done this before. Murder, conspiracy, unlawful disposal. Special circumstances to be argued. Not guilty, each boy said, as if the syllables were a door they could still shut against the weather. The prosecution built the case the way people build bridges over rivers that do not want to be crossed, increment by increment. Girders of fact hammered into muddy banks of human memory. The bus footage, the 1903 here text, the deceptive ceiling fan photo, the 2114 phone ping that caught Alan's grandmother's address in its cold cone, the chalk ring on the basement floor, too steady to be an accident, the coverless book, a collage of online fragments, lyrics dressed as liturgy, the wax on shelves in rings where glass once stood, the setlist taped to the furnace, void offering rain. A phrase from the DA's opening slid into the room like a draft under a door. Theater that curdled into harm. Defense counsel tried to dissolve the bridge, plank by plank. Teenagers are dramatic, they said. Teenagers copy things they do not understand. The set list was performance art. The chalk was cosplay. The knives with tape around the handles were props. The corrupted video clip, 31 seconds of pixel jitter. A candle swelling into a brief, artificial sun. proved only that old computers fail at the worst possible moment. But what happened next does not answer to logic. The lieutenant's summary had warned months before, and the jury now watched both sides wrestle with a logic no one wanted. Digital forensics stepped into the light like a quiet choir. The router labeled Guest 2G, still breathing on the washer when seized, had a memory not meant to be persuasive and therefore more persuasive. Connection logs. Disconnections at 21:17. 22:03. A device labeled Allen phone toggling a flashlight at 21:47. A laptop showing creation attempts for a file that had been overwritten in a way experts called user-directed. Not a ghost in the machine, the witness said, but a hand. Soil chemistry spoke next. Samples scraped from the shovel blade matched the disturbed patch behind the garage, a cocktail of minerals the expert jokingly called a neighborhood's fingerprint, a joke that made no one smile. Microfibers from taped knife handles matched adhesive residue found in wax rings. The science was not cinematic. It was patient. Testimony from the boys came like weather moving over a field. First heat, then wind, then, unexpectedly, a cold front. Allen's attorney kept him behind the levee of a Fifth Amendment. Jay took the stand and spoke in fragments, his voice reaching for syllables that might make him sound older than he was. Liminal, initiatory, symbolic. Under cross-examination, the words frayed. "Who wrote offering on the set list?" the prosecutor asked. "We all did," Jay said, which is not an answer. R remained a study in monosyllables. "Yes, no, don't know, wasn't there then." D cried, again, and the prosecutor did not offer tissues, the bailiff did. "We wanted to feel like we mattered," D said, and the room tightened with the pure, useless truth of it. Witnesses circled the house from the outside with their memories like flashlights. A neighbor recalling a draft under a door, like the place exhaled. Another swearing she saw a fifth figure that night, taller than Allen, hat brim blunt against a streetlight, a claim the defense cherished and the prosecution called the oldest human habit, error. The radio host who had curated legends in the weeks after the arrest was not called. The court needed less fog, not more. According to official records, the medical examiner testified there were ritualistic elements present. He hated the phrase and said so. The jury heard the hatred and took it for caution, which it was. He did not read from photographs. He did not count wounds. He pointed to patterns. Wax, tape fibers. Chalk arcs, the performative arrangement of candles. No ancient rite, he said. Eyes making a small apology to the mother in the second row. Only borrowed gestures arranged with fervor. Even seasoned officers, he added carefully, had stepped outside the scene that day to breathe. The defense floated other shapes: contamination, chain of custody stumbles, a body-worn camera that blinked out for 6 minutes when a battery icon winked red, the corrupted clip stamped 3:07 a.m. Machines lie, counsel said, and the jury wrote the line down because it sounded like something they should. The prosecution returned to people, to the mother's 3 texts. "Tell me when you're settled. Did you eat? Good night, love." Delivered and not read. To the guidance counselor who underlined scene twice. To M, the friend who whispered belong into a microphone that made the word sound bigger than itself. Belonging, after love, before forever. The most dangerous noun in the youth lexicon. Closing arguments did not thunder. They accumulated. Stones, not lightning. The prosecutor said, "Intent grows in rooms where performance is mistaken for permission." The defense said, "Teenagers play at shadows, and sometimes shadows play back." The judge's instructions came in the even tone of a man who knew that words can both matter and fail. The jury retired. The room sat. The clocks at the bottom of the cameras kept time that the people could not feel. According to official records, the verdict arrived on a Wednesday at 3:16 p.m. Guilty on all major counts. The mother did not move for 3 seconds, no one could later account for. Then she put her hand on the table in front of her, as if to be sure the world still held. Allen stared at the invisible point he had practiced. J. flinched like a boy waking too quickly. R blinked. D wept small, like a machine that had used up its fuel. Some believe the truth was buried forever in that basement, the late-night host said in a softer register that evening. Others believe the truth is what was carried upstairs, a hunger that finds its mask wherever it can. Sentencing blurred into summer. Impact statements braided grace and fury. A teacher spoke of a Polaroid gone crooked and staying crooked. A bus driver spoke of a girl in a dark hoodie pressing her forehead to cold glass. 2 stops early. The mother did not mention the basement. She mentioned oatmeal, a laundry cycle, the word love used without quotation marks. The judge used the long word states require when they take a life's remainder away. Consecutive terms, without possibility. Enhancements sustained. Justice, someone said into the hallway air, as if testing the weight of a tool they might have to carry home. Transfers began before the week forgot itself. Shackles. Chain. Processing rooms painted the color of surrender. The 4 were parceled into units by classification computers that did not know what had happened in a basement and did not care. Intake photographs lit their faces with a fluorescent honesty that dissolves pose. Paper slippers. Numbers for names in systems that prefer numbers. The doors learned their weight. But what happened next does not answer to reason, the lieutenant had written. And the sentence folded itself over a new chapter. Rumors sprouted at once, watered by grievance and boredom, that someone had posted a bounty, that someone had carved the word offering into a table in the day room, that old disputes from outside had followed the boys through razor wire like weather. Ті, хто вважає, що правду поховали назавжди. Some believed the truth was buried for good, not only in a yard, not only in a case file, but in corridors where cameras blink and clocks at the bottom stamp time that cannot be lived twice. Outside the walls, the grandmother's house changed hands. The basement sheet with its thorn-crowned circle had long since been boxed and shelved in a room whose air smelled like dust and plastic, evidence aging without forgetting. The yard behind the chain link knit itself back together, as yards do. Dogs still pause there. Some refuse the corner. Some will not leave it. On February 19th, a year later, a single jar candle in a supermarket glass guttered beside the old rails. No one claimed it. The night did not perform. The air smelled, for a second, like wet leaves and metal. And somewhere, in a place devoted to consequence, a rumor sharpened into a plan that would write the last lines of this story, lines that will not console. After the verdict, corridors where clocks don't sleep. According to official records, the transfers took place on a Thursday. A bus with blacked-out windows, chain that chimed against chain, doors that decided the pace. Alan went one way, J, R, and D another. Classification computers, splitting them like cards, indifferent to narrative. Intake photographs flattened whatever posture they'd learned to wear in court. New numbers, new rules, new air. Inside, the days arranged themselves with the stubborn geometry of cement. Count, chow, count. Programs for those who signed. Silence for those who didn't. The camera domes kept their silver halflanes on everything. Time was stamped at the bottom of every frame, as if truth could be notarized by a blinking colon. Even seasoned officers were shaken. The sergeant from intake would say later, not by violence, he had learned that weather, but by how quickly stories become currency on the inside. By week's end, the basement had migrated into the day room, in the mouths of men who had never left this county, and into the yard in the mouths of men who had seen too many counties to count. The word offering survived the trip. Here the record thins and rumor gets fat. A kite passed on ruled paper that smelled like soap and metal. A whispered bounty, small and larger, then payable in attention alone. A name scratched into the underside of a day room table with something sharper than a fingernail. Some people believe the truth was buried forever, not only in a yard. The radio host would say months later. A prayer point. But in corridors where cameras blink and clocks at the bottom mark minutes that won't come back. The department's incident logs for that month are a map of almosts. An argument in a shower at 16:08. A lockdown at 16:11. A normal operations restored at 17:40. Words that skate along the surface like a dragonfly over water, never breaking skin. According to official records, the first death occurred on a Sunday. Facility C. Day room, 14:37. The line reads, altercation between inmates. A phrase so bloodless it could be folded into a drawer. The tape, the one the jury will never see, shows angles, not answers. A corner where a camera blinks into a blind spot. A door that opens a fraction too slowly. But Congress people make it walk through textual hats at real speed, like choreography, and at half speed, like intent. Officers moved fast, trained batons low, voices high with command. The medical examiner wrote in a hand that has learned to be gentle with nouns. Injuries inconsistent with survival. There is no poetry in that room. The second death followed 2 days later in a different building stamped with the same fatigue. A stairwell that had been calm for a decade learned a new sound. A tray clattered. Prosody, to a speak. Someone yelled a name that would not help. The log writes, response within protocol, life-saving measures attempted, coroner notified. The third and fourth decks, because this story does not console, arrived like the last beads on a string pulled too tight. No single fight, no single hour to blame. A pattern instead, braided from grievance and boredom and the communal appetite that finds its mask wherever it can. According to official records, a spokesperson said at the podium, no one ever wants to stand behind. The suspected assailants were inmates housed on the same tiers. He declined to identify them by race or gang in that moment. Internal reports later would, as records do, list descriptors without interpretation, among them, black. The files use the word involved. The air everywhere else used uglier words, and we will not. The mothers learned by phone, then by a doorbell, then by a room with chairs arranged along the perimeter, because no furniture can face the center of news like this. The phrases came out of their boxes. We regret to inform you. In our custody, an incident, ongoing investigation. The judge who had spoken of consecutive terms heard about consecutive deaths, went very still, and said nothing to anyone for a while. Justice has its own weather, the lieutenant had written in his summary months earlier. No one on that corridor used the word that day. Outside, it rained the kind of rain that makes chain link look like staff paper. The grandmother's house sat empty in escrow. The basement, long since swabbed of wax and chalk, kept its cold. The old rails behind the fence stayed dead. A jar candle guttered at the stop where Amara had once pressed her forehead to glass. The label on the glass had peeled to a lace of glue. Someone, no one knows who, wrote her name on the bus bench with a dull key. The letters were too shallow to last the winter. In the wake, contradictions multiplied the way pain does when it looks for somewhere to sleep. "This is justice," said a man into a microphone, his voice too loud for the room. "This is not justice," said a woman into a quieter one. On the late-night shows, callers braided conspiracy to fit their hungers. A fifth figure returns, taller than Alan, hat brim against a light. Cover-ups bloom like mold when walls stay damp long enough. The body-worn camera that blinked out for 6 minutes in the basement grew an evil twin in prison. A glitch that arrived at the worst moment and left with the best alibis. Machines lie, the defense had told the jury. People do, too, but softer. According to official records, the state closed its case files with words that satisfy only paper: adjudicated, concluded, deceased. The DA held a press conference and did not say the word closure, because he has seen what it does to faces. The mother spoke once, at the vigil that became tradition without anyone consenting to it, and she did not mention basements or verdicts or corridors. She said oatmeal, a laundry cycle, the word love without quotation marks. The crowd made the quiet that dignifies, and when it broke like ice. What remains? Fragments arranged on shelves in rooms that smell like dust and plastic. A set list with 3 words that never deserved candles. Void, offering, rain. A sheet folded into evidence. A router labeled guest 2G that will never breathe again. A metronome stilled by a thumb that pressed too long. And questions, the kind that do not go to summary. How does pretend become permission? Where does belonging turn carnivorous? Who taught children to dress hunger as ritual, and why did the performance work? Dechto vajaya, що правду поховали назавжди. The narrator in the head says, some believe the truth was buried for good, under dirt, under panic, under the stories people tell to be able to sleep. According to official records, a neighbor's dog would not leave that corner of the yard alone. According to official records, the officers did their jobs. According to official records, the clocks at the bottom of the footage kept time. But official records do not remember the smell of wet leaves and metal, the shade of navy that makes streetlights look like halos, the way a mother's hand learns the grain of a table because it needs to hold something the world will not. And that is where we must end, not with certainty, which this story never offered, but with attention to the small, ordinary grace of a girl who loved the sky before it turned black, and to the unanswerable ache that asks us again and again to keep looking, even when the light refuses to land.